Morning. Welcome to Coffee Talk, and good morning, everybody on the panel. We are back down to our regular group this morning. We don't have any guests, and you're just stuck with us. How's everybody today?
Doing good.
You're just, quiet. You're quiet. We're not going to be quiet for very long. So, you know, the last few weeks we've been talking a lot about what we're doing to kind of get through distance learning, how we can provide some better social opportunities for kids to have more better experiences socially. And we're in June. It's June 9th. Some schools are out already. Schools are going to be out this week. My kids are out next week. And so we have that happening. And then we also have phase 2 of the reopening of the state of Connecticut happening in a couple of weeks. And so there's kind of a lot going on right now. And I want to take a few minutes to just get a sense from you guys and maybe some feedback from people who are watching or listening. How are you feeling about everything? I mean, this is such a strange time. We're moving from, you know, the whole everything shut down. And now how do we survive in this shutdown mode with distance learning and keeping everybody inside? And we got there, right? We were doing it. We were in it. We were never fully comfortable, but it was kind of a new normal. And now we're slowly seeing that change. Schools are ending. Now it's, are we going to camps? Are we doing this? Are we doing that? And then what's going to happen in the fall? Everything's changing. What are you guys thinking? How are you feeling about everything?
I mean, for me, full transparency, we're frozen. Like, I am at the point where I'm afraid to, even though I know everything is reopening, I've done nothing other than my weekly, very safe grocery shopping. I'm still stuck. I'm afraid to let my kids go out in public. I'm afraid to do anything beyond leaving the house. I know I have to get over it, but and I'm imagining I'm not the only one, but I
was going to say, I don't think you're alone in that. I don't think you're alone. What about you, Michelle? How are you doing?
I was just going to say, we saw a couple of friends this past weekend, and it's just like awkward because we don't really know, like, trying to be outside and socially distance, but, you know, is it okay to go inside for a moment to, like, use the bathroom, or like if it rains, like, and it did rain and we had to go inside, and it was just like everyone's feeling kind of uncomfortable.
Like, I really shouldn't be here.
Right. We didn't really plan for that. So just kind of like adjusting, and but yeah, I feel a little bit awkward just like re-entering into the world again with people.
Yeah. And think about how the kids are feeling. You know, I know with my kids, we've loosened a little bit in my neighborhood, and we've been seeing neighbors outdoors. And my younger daughter, it's like almost exciting if she has to go to the bathroom and we're not at our house, because then she's like, well, I can go in the house and go to the bathroom. And it's almost like she wants that normalcy. I'm sensing that they do want that normalcy, even though they're a little bit afraid of it. What about you in your house, Chrissy, with all those different aged kids? You've got it from the gamut.
Yeah, and I think it's overwhelming in the sense that, you know, we've been so looking forward to getting back to whatever normal is. And now that there's a little bit of that loosening up, like Katie said, you're like, oh, well, maybe we're not ready. Mm-hmm. I don't want to impose that that little bit of an anxiety onto the kids, right? So it's finding that balance of how do you keep them safe but not make them feel anxious, but at the same time make them aware enough that, okay, that doesn't mean that you just go right back out to the way it was before. Like, you're not going in people's houses and you're not going into stores right now, especially for my oldest who's driving, you know, no, you're not going to run into the supermarket because I don't know that he's being safe. So there's definitely this like push and pull, and you're not, you know, I think like Katie said, we've been home for so long now. While it sounded really good in theory to jump back in, it's a little scary. So we are definitely we've loosened up. We've seen people like you guys, you know, mostly outside. We did have, like Michelle said, we had family over on the weekend and it started to rain. So then you're like, oh my God, you kind of freeze and you want to hug and you don't hug. It's just
isn't that such a strange thing? I mean, I really am seeking that physical connection with friends, you know, like it's so weird. I saw a friend yesterday I hadn't seen in a long time, and it was so weird. It's like, hi, and you want to hug them, but it's just so weird.
Yeah.
Has anybody ventured out to a restaurant, gone to a restaurant yet? The outdoor seating?
No.
I did outdoor seating. I'm going to admit this is like an adult audience. We went to the winery right down the street and just had a glass of wine just to get out. And it was lovely.
Was it?
Oh my God. It felt amazing. And I felt like everything was very safe. You know, the wait staff was in masks. You wore your mask till you got to the table and then you took it out, or took it off. Lots of space in between. And it was a beautiful day, you know, to sit outside. So it just felt really nice I thought I would be more nervous than I was, but they did a nice job.
And what about June 17th when indoor restaurants open, gyms open? What are you thinking, Lisa? Are you going to go?
No, probably not. Probably not. Although I will say that I feel like Chrissy, you were talking about like the push pull sort of aspect. And on the one hand, I feel like I have fatigue around, you know, when we're talking about COVID-19 sort of, it's been so long, right? So as much as we're used to all of the precautions, I am getting sick of them. And it's hard, I think, when it's something that you can't necessarily see, right? You can't see the virus. So it feels like, I don't know, like this weird, like you really want to be careful, but at the same time, I think it's just human nature to want to sort of go back to normal, especially when you see people that you want to hug or you want to comfort or whatever, and to have to remind yourself like, oops, no, that's probably not a good idea. And then I also, like, I'm a very rules-based person. And so I
don't say.
I know. I'm a rule follower.
There you go, Facebook Live. She's a rule follower.
So for me, we've had, you know, all these rules in place for the past 3 months or so. And so I've talked to parents about this too, with their kids who are also very rule-based. Now that we're backing up on the rules a little bit, how does that feel, and what's the anxiety that is creating, right? So we've told kids that, like, we have to be careful, we have to do all these things because we don't want people to get sick and because we don't want the virus to spread. But now we're saying, well, actually, we're sort of changing the rules and we're giving this guidance so that you can spend time outside with a certain number of people, or you can start to do these things. And so explaining that to kids who are like, but you taught me this was the rule, I think is a real challenge.
And it's very confusing. I mean, it's confusing for us, right? So we're all talking about all these feelings that we're having, all these feelings of uncertainty, this kind of push and pull that we're all having. And think about some of our kids who are very literal and rule followers, and they don't really understand. Now we've gotten them to maintain 6 feet distance. Finally, I am thinking of my kids, finally. And now they're like, wait, so the rule is now that if I go to camp, I don't have to maintain 6 feet distance with certain people. I don't understand that. I think that's a real thing, Lisa. And I think it's something that we're all going to be dealing with and working with when we're working with families and when we're working with our own children and for ourselves, is trying to kind of figure all that out. It's not easy. You know, and everybody knows that I'm tired of hearing that this is an unprecedented time. But because it is, and it's so uncertain and there's still so much uncertainty, we're having to figure out this next phase of this new normal. So we figured out that okay, we're in quarantine now, let's figure out how to slowly get out. And Lisa, to your point, it's not easy. There's a lot of feelings around it. And if we are going to have to work with our kids to figure this out, we kind of have to work on ourselves a little bit to figure this out, right? We have to be a little bit more flexible in our thinking so that we can help them be more flexible in theirs. And, you know, I want to do a little bit of an activity. We all wanted to do this activity this morning. And it's a strategy that you really can use anywhere in your life, but it's a strategy that we're going to talk about this morning. to set the stage for these coming weeks of the state reopening, looking at kind of the fear and the anxiety surrounding the state opening up, the change from distance learning to summer life, the forward thinking to the fall, and what are we doing in school? Are we going to school? Are we not going to school? Will I see my friends? Will I not see my friends? How do we set the stage for our own success so that we can ensure success for children, for the kids that we're working with, or how can we help the kids have, increase their own flexibility in their thinking for themselves so that they can start to move forward. So there's a little activity, and I'm going to share my screen because we're going to just do it together. Does anybody have anything else to say about it before we get started? Should we just go for it and get started?
Do it.
You guys are ready. You guys are ready.
We're ready.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and we're going to talk about it. But before, I'll explain the box when I share my screen. So why don't I just go ahead and do that? All right, can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Okay, so let's see. So over the next few weeks, we're going to be starting to talk about a lot of different strategies and ways that we can kind of support each other through this next phase of the pandemic. How can we get ourselves complete with distance learning, in full on into summer, getting out into the community a little bit, maybe, if that's where we are, and then thinking forward, how do we set the stage for being ready for fall and whatever happens with fall, given that that's with school, given that that's uncertain. So to do that, setting the stage for some psychological flexibility and success during this next phase, we're going to look at this box here. And these top boxes here is all going to be around our actual behaviors and what we do. And these bottom boxes is all about kind of what's going on, what are the things that are going on in our head and in our heart. Okay, so I'm gonna start over here with this bottom right box that says, what is important to us related to this next phase of the pandemic? What do we value? So the most important thing to think about here is, what are our values related to this? And again, it doesn't have to be related to the pandemic or related to COVID. It could just be anything in your life that what are your values? What is most important to you? So let's just start talking about things that are most important to us during this. I know for me, one thing that I value that's most important to me is having the best factual information related to this next phase. So I'm going to put that. Let's say, how about being educated with most current What else? What else are we valuing during this time?
I think for us, giving our kids a fun summer while keeping them safe.
What else?
For
what are some other things that we make?
Sorry, Liz, I didn't mean to interrupt. For us, given a little bit of what I mentioned before, we have a very large extended family. So it's really important for us to reestablish some of those connections in a safe way.
Are we going to put just reconnecting?
Yeah, I think so.
I think, keeping ourselves safe too, and making sure that we're taking care of ourselves during this time.
Yeah, I don't know about any of you, but my self-care is starting to go out the window a little bit as this is drawing on longer and longer.
Yes.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, that's good. Well, and all of these, if you look at all of these, they all kind of weave into each other, don't they? If we're not keeping ourselves safe and having good self-care practices, how are we going to reconnect with people, and how are we going to ensure a safe and fun summer for our kids, right?
Yes.
What do you think? You think that's good? You think that's good enough for this activity? And this can be as long or as short as you want it. And again, what you value out there may be very different, or personally, my list alone may be different than our collective list. So we're going to look at this in terms of how are we going to arrange our coffee talks for the next few weeks in terms of how we might be able to support each other. So let's move over into the bottom left, which again, I want to just say again, see, I lost some space there, but the bottom boxes are what's in our heads and in our hearts. So these are kind of the internal things that are going on, that are swimming around. So what gets in the way of getting to those important things or values? What are some of those not so good feelings that kind of interfere with our values and what's important to us? What's going to get in the way of these things?
Fear of contracting the virus, for sure.
Yeah.
And I probably should, really capitalize the fear, because I think a lot of these things that we're going to put in this is going to be based in fear, right? So fear of contracting the virus and loved ones contracting the virus. What else? What other kinds of things? I know for me, I always think of the social media rabbit hole.
Yes, definitely.
And you guys know what I mean by that. Like,
yeah.
I mean, if you're looking for it on the internet, you're going to find it. So just anything that you read, you're kind of taking in, and then just getting obsessed with researching and looking and looking and looking and looking. And it may not just be social media. It may be social media and just the internet. Right. So that definitely gets in the way for me, because you can get yourself so wrapped up in that all this time is going by. I mean, how am I going to be able to stick with what I'm valuing if I'm just so focused in reading about what's happening and wondering if it's true or not? What else? What other things get in the way?
I think for me, going back to like some of the self-care practices, there's just so much uncertainty. So like, how long is this gonna be going on for? And, I think that's sort of getting in the way of keeping ourselves safe and others too. We just kind of want to know. So maybe, the longer that this goes on and my self-care practices are kind of continuing to decline, because I'm like, okay, well, I'm stuck here.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. What else?
This might go back to what you were saying, Liz, about the social media rabbit hole. So if it is the same, you could ignore me. But I'm just thinking around this feeling of confusion. We talked about in the beginning, there's conflicting information from conflicting sources. So is it safe? Isn't it safe? So for me, it just feels confusing.
That makes sense. Confusion around conflicting information.
Yeah. Yep.
And I know, I think something that we've talked a lot about, but we haven't mentioned here yet, is I know for me, for my own kids, and I'm thinking about some of the kids that we work with at the school and out in the public schools, it's, there's a fear around taking them out. And will they be able to manage a mask? Will they be able to manage some of these things? So it's kind of the fear around our children too, the kids that we work with and our own children, about how they're going to respond. So these worries about how kids will respond in this, and maybe avoiding things because of that fear.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know if we're ready for this, or if we want to kind of put it off for another week, but something I've been reading a little bit about and seeing, and I could see happening with some of our students too, is they're comfortable home, because many of the students like the academics, they like the adult interaction that they're getting.
Yeah.
The social interaction is difficult for them. So I think transitioning having to deal with people again is going to be difficult. I mean, even for me, I think after a particularly long Zoom meeting the other day, I said to you guys, like, oh my gosh, I have to get used to being in front of people for 8 hours a day again. Like, as much as you love it and miss it, there is an emotionally draining piece of being around people. So I think it's that fear too.
Yeah. I'm just going to add in a couple of details, just like face mask wearing, 6 foot rule. Unfortunately, it's easier to be home. All right, so the fear of transition, and then it's kind of like the not knowing where to, maybe I'll make that a different one, around all of these things. I know for me, one of the things that you said, Katie, earlier, you said that you're kind of frozen, right? So I'm wondering if people are feeling like, okay, well, how do I think I need to start getting my kids out. I haven't brought my kids out. They haven't been wearing a mask. They haven't been having to practice this 6 feet distance. They don't understand those things. What do I do? And so there's this feeling of, how do I start? I like this fear of the feeling frozen, frozen about starting to get people out. Okay, I think that's plenty. So let's, and just for time's sake, let's move on to up here. So what do we actually do? We're moving up to the top left. And again, these top boxes are behavior. So these are actual actions. What do we actually do? So what do we actually do to get rid of the fear and anxiety around COVID and this next phase of the pandemic? What are we actually doing right now? Freeze.
Yeah, pretty much.
For me, I try to get that physical activity in every day, even if it's just a walk.
I think maybe this is kind of coming up too, but from before, but avoidance. I think we're just kind of, you know, okay, I'm not going to go out. You know, it's scary.
And I think, and this is because of the confusion and fear, I think a lot of times I do go into that internet rabbit hole.
Yes, me too.
Which ends up leading to more fear. So it's kind of that cycle.
Yeah, so if we look at some of the things, so if we reframe some of these things, because now that I'm looking back down here, if we reframe some of these things as more internalizing, and these are the actual actions of doing it. So, so thinking about, so this is more, you know, like perseverating, the perseveration, right? On, and then the feeling frozen really gets into that avoiding, and then this is the actual what you're doing. So going into the internet rabbit hole, what other things are we doing to get around, or to, you know, kind of get rid of the fear and anxiety around COVID in this next phase? Any other thoughts before we move into our what we can do?
I mean, I think a lot of it goes under avoidance as kind of an umbrella category, right? So like, I think about like the amount of really bad TV that I've been watching, right?
That TV is good though.
Bad TV is good, but it really, I mean, it is avoidance. Like I'm not dealing with anything that's real. It's just, you know, watching a lot of
Binge watching.
Right. And then, you know, I think stress, I was going to say stress eating, for sure.
Did you say that before I wrote it?
I was thinking it as you're right.
We're like, me and you, we're like that. Yeah, so I think a lot of these things in terms of what we're actually doing to avoid these uncomfortable feelings that we have down here. And one thing that you know, there's no wrong answers when filling out this chart. So wherever you put things, it doesn't really matter as long as we're kind of getting to the place where we understand what our values are and we understand what we want to do with all of these things. But when we look at the left-hand side in terms of what's getting in the way and what we do, that, you know, to get rid of the feelings that we have, we want to think about kind of down here being more kind of the internalizing and up here being more the actual behaviors. So when we're thinking about coffee talk, and we don't have a ton of time left, and we're going to start thinking about over the next couple of weeks, we want to make sure that we're going to be supporting each other through this next phase and trying to get all of us to some of these values. Now, I know these aren't everybody's values out there. These are what we've just determined are our own values as this collective coffee talk group. And so these are kind of some of the things that our committed action is to move forward in support of these values. So what we want to do is talk about some of these things. What would be our committed action with regard to our values? So what would you guys say our focus should be as we move forward to support this group, to support people who are watching, and keeping in mind what we have identified as our values?
So we've talked about like self-care practices a little bit.
We have
like self-care as kind of the opposite almost of like that freezing and avoidance, right? So whatever those self-care practices are for you, and they can be different for, anybody, but whatever is like a healthy mechanism for stress reduction. I think about mindfulness. I know we have physical activity in the other box, but I wonder like if that's something that we could kind of get to doing, because that's good for us. And then I also, so something that we've listed as being important is being educated with the most factual information, but we also have that we're perseverating and going down this like media internet rabbit hole. So maybe something that a committed action could be like designating like a time to collect whatever information you're gonna collect, and then let it go after that, right? So like you're gonna choose a half an hour every day to look at the news or whatever, and then after that you're gonna let it go.
And I think the same with designating a time to vent. Also for me, who's frozen, maybe setting up even like small steps in terms of kids out in public and being very careful about it, and kind of setting up a game plan for starting to expose them a little bit.
Yeah, and I think along those lines with our kids, I think, educating them about what's going on in an appropriate way, and keeping them informed about, how we're moving forward, and, what it looks like.
As you guys are talking and I'm looking at, the behaviors that we engage in that are driven by fear, by anxiety, it's just really like, how do we stop that cycle? We get caught up in this wheel of negative behaviors that, you guys are going to laugh when I say this because we were joking before, it's not working, right?
Yes.
And is this working for us? And it's not working for us. So how do you break that cycle?
Well, and I think one thing is, and I always think of you, Dr. Dobey, when I think of this, and I share this strategy a lot, is putting some space between this bottom left, these feelings in the bottom left, by prefacing it with, I'm having the thought that. Mm-hmm. So not just, I'm so anxious, I'm having the thought that this is really scary and I don't want to go anywhere. It separates you a little bit. And what it also does is it makes some room for acceptance. You're accepting these things. I'm having the thought that I accept that it's here. But you want to know something? I accept that this is here. I'm putting some space between it. It's just a thought. It's not, it's real, but it's just a thought. And I'm committed to still taking those baby steps to move forward. So it's saying, yes, I understand that this is how I'm having this thought. But it is just a thought. And in order for me to get to where I want to go, to get to what's important to me, I'm going to do this even though it's hard. I'm going to acknowledge that it's here. I'm going to accept it, but I'm going to do these things that I'm committing to even though they're hard, because I know it's going to get me closer to what I value and what's important to me. And I think that's the process, right? That's how the psychological flexibility process works. It's understanding and accepting and separating yourself a little bit from these yucky things, as she said in her video, in that video that we had listened to that one time, these yucky things, moving away from that, and then accepting it, and then kind of continuing to move forward with a committed action so that we can get to this place to where we get to what's important to us. And I mean, and I know that we could go on and on and on about this, but this is a strategy that you could use in any part of your life when, you know, trying to increase psychological flexibility and kind of understanding how that process works, right? And so this is just one way to do it. We decided to do this here for this next phase of for kind of tackling this next phase of the pandemic as we're navigating it, and as we want to support everybody out there navigating it. So we're going to be coming back to this over the next few weeks and talking about this a little bit more. So next week, I'd love to get some questions from people who are listening. Let us know what kinds of things we could focus on. What are your committed actions? What are your values? What are some things that we can push forward and really work on? I know for next week and the next few weeks, what we really want to do also is, you know, really provide some good strategies to move towards those committed actions so that we can actually do them. So what are some things we can do? Kind of like some of the strategies we talked about in earlier sessions of Coffee Talk, some of the mindfulness strategies and those kinds of things, and some of the self-care things. But what are some other ways we can do it? What are some ways that we can support people to get their kids out? Is it because there's mask wearing is difficult? How can we support people who are having difficulties with that? Is it the social distancing? Is that difficult for kids when they go out? How do we teach kids to not ignore the social distancing, or to understand why it's important, or just to do it and to be able to get out a little bit? And how do we ensure that we can be safe and still have, you know, fun and exciting times and reconnect with people that we care about? So that's where we're going, I think, for the next couple weeks. Any other thoughts from you guys?
That was a great summary, Liz.
All right.
Said it all.
So I'd love to hear, we would all love to hear from everybody out there. And we hope that this exercise was useful. We have all done it in different aspects of our lives and find it useful and are still working on it, because let's face it, none of us have, I mean, I don't think I'll ever be able to say I have mastered psychological flexibility or flexibility in my thinking all the time. It's always having to come back to really formalize it, not formalizing, but organizing it in a nice picture. Everybody knows I like pictures for myself. So until next week, we're going to continue with this discussion about this next phase of the pandemic and kind of trying to improve our flexibility in our thinking. And that will wrap it up for us for today, unless there's anything else. See you next week.